Here we go, guys, with the final screencast on the American Revolution. After the Battle of Saratoga, France really saw a lot in us, saw a lot in the American soldiers, American fighters, and with the help of Benjamin Franklin, who had gone to France to ask for assistance from the king and the other aristocrats, the wealthy people, the wealthy Frenchmen, France actually signs a peace treaty, a treaty of alliance with America in 1778, and they actually formally declare war on England again. Well, we know again because the first time they had done that was the French and Indian War. So here we go again, France against England. France sends us money, supplies, and troops. One of the most famous soldiers to come to us was a man named Marquis de Lafayette, who becomes very close with George Washington, becomes very close friends, and Washington go on to become Washington's closest friend, and almost like a son to George Washington, filling a void that was left by Benedict Arnold. France then goes on and convinces Spain to join on America's side as well. They don't send soldiers, but they send food and supplies and equipment for the American troops. In the winter of 1777 to 1778, George Washington and his army go to southeastern Pennsylvania to a place called Valley Forge. There they spend the winter. Most had no jackets, no shoes, little to no food. A quarter of all the troops die of malnutrition, cold, or disease. So they either starved to death, got sick from smallpox, or they just literally froze to death, or like I said, were starved to death. But help came from a Prussian soldier who teaches the troops how to drill and discipline, proper military etiquette. And his name is Friedrich von Steuben. Steuben was a military genius to America. In reality, in the Prussian army, he was just another guy. But for us, who had really no military prowess, he was as good as it got. He did some major changes. Let alone just teaching the soldiers how to drill, he made some really simple adjustments to Valley Forge, like putting the kitchens on the top of the hills and putting the bathrooms on the bottom of the hills, so all wastewater flowed downhill, away from food. Most troops, even though they were suffering and dying, those that stayed, they stayed for Washington because he was that powerful of a leader, that powerful of a symbol. Now, the war does move on south in the form of guerrilla warfare. Now, guerrilla warfare is kind of surprise attacks, hit and run. And one of the key leaders of this was a man named Francis Marion, and he actually gained the nickname of Swamp Fox. Now, how Marion did this was he had a group of about 20 guys, not many, but they were all mounted soldiers, minimum supplies, only what they could carry, and they would surprise the British as they came by. They would come out of the swamps, attack, inflict heavy injury on the British soldiers, and then they'd disappear into the swamps again. Now, this was very useful in the South because these guys knew the land. They used the swamps to their advantage. They were all on horseback, so the horses were able to get through the swamps easily, whereas the foot soldiers could not. And once they realized that there were alligators down there, by foot really didn't become an option for them. So this was really useful in the Southern campaign. So useful that the war is going to end pretty soon. General Cornwallis, Lord Cornwallis, sets up his base in Yorktown, Virginia. I'll show you a map of this, but this was probably the worst place he could have possibly put it. He put it there because it was right at the mouth of the Chesapeake Bay, and it was easy to resupply by boat from New York. But it was also easy to block off for attack. So the French fleet was able to move in, the French Navy was able to move in and block off the Chesapeake Bay, cutting Cornwallis off from escape and aid. So the British ships could not get to him. He didn't know this yet. He was waiting for ships to come in. No one was coming. Little did he know that George Washington had already cut off his escape route on land, and the French had cut off his escape route by water. So Washington starts a siege of the city of Yorktown and just bombarding it day in and day out. One of the key leaders of this was a man named Alexander Hamilton. Hamilton led an attack on what's called Redoubt 9. Now, the redoubts were these heavily fortified embankments surrounding the city with cannons. And what these soldiers did was they attacked these redoubts under cover of darkness. They didn't shoot at all until they were right on top of the redoubts. And they used primarily bayonets. So they would conserve their their ammunition. And it was more surprising because with the flashes, they'd be seen coming, they'd be able to fire with cannons. But they did this under cover of darkness, surprise attack. They didn't even load their muskets to prevent accidental fires. This was all hand-to-hand combat, very down and dirty, very violent. Washington starts his siege. Washington surrounds Yorktown on September 28th, 1781, and he begins the siege. And it lasts almost a month. It's a very slow, methodical process. But the entire time, Cornwallis is cut off from escape. So for a month, they're just having cannonballs shot at them over their heads. The French fleet is sailing in and out, attacking them. Cornwallis surrenders October 19th, 1781. Like I said, almost a month later. British Prime Minister Lord North finally accepts defeat. And he says to the king, look, it's over. We've lost it. And they begin the peace treaty negotiation process. Which leads us to the Treaty of Paris. But here, like I said, right over here is where Yorktown is. You see the opening to the Chesapeake Bay. Now the French fleet was out here, cutting off any resupply from New York. Now, here's a close-up view. Right here's Yorktown, right on this point. Washington had cut off up here and was slowly creeping in and encircling Yorktown. He even had men come down by Gloucester Point over here and start shelling from that side of Yorktown. So they were just getting attacked from all angles. The French fleet would come in and shell from over here. They were again attacked from this side and from this side. It was a losing battle. They didn't have a chance. But this was the final major battle of the American Revolution. There were other battles that were fought after, but by the time word spread around and the British officers were alerted and they were able to retreat, this was essentially the final battle of the Revolution. But why? Why did America win when we should have lost? We went up against the greatest army of the day, the most powerful army, most powerful country. Why did we win? The first reason was we had better leadership, and it comes down to George Washington. Men fought for him, they died for him because they trusted him and they loved him. He was that important of a figure of that time. Just as importantly, though, we had foreign aid. We had aid from France. Had we not gotten that help from France and Spain, we may not have won. We also knew the land better than any of the British soldiers. And we had motivation on our side. What does that mean? Why were the British troops fighting? Because they were told to. They were fighting for their paycheck. Why were the American colonists fighting? For their freedom, for their liberty. So they were willing to die for their purpose. The British soldiers, well, they would rather not. The Americans that were fighting, they were more than willing to die for their cause. It was that important to them. So we come to the Treaty of Paris. It was signed in the year 1783. There were 6 conditions. I'll go down each bullet. First and foremost, America was free and independent, 100%, no questions asked. We were an independent country. It established our boundaries as the Mississippi River because France and Spain were on the other side. It was coming back to French hands, but it was at this point Spain on the other side of the Mississippi River. Canada would remain British, and Florida. Florida is actually given back to the Spanish at this point for their help. America would be allowed to fish off the coast of Canada, which we still are today. Made those waters open to both sides. Both sides would repay their war debts, which would prove very problematic for America, and we'll talk about that in our next unit. England would return any enslaved persons they captured, any POWs, any prisoners of wars. Unfortunately, though, for most Americans, anyone that was captured by the British, they typically died in jail because the British prisons were atrocious and they were not taken care of. Most people died in there from malnutrition, starvation, or disease, because it was just deplorable conditions. And the last thing was that Congress would recommend, and I bolded that and capitalized that for a reason, that the states return property seized from loyalists. Now, the thing is that they would recommend, quote unquote, that the land and property be returned, but it didn't happen. Most loyalists did not hang around. Most of them either went back to England or they went to Canada. And that's how Canada became so populated, was people who were here in America didn't want to go back to England, so they moved to Canada, which was probably their best compromise because someone loyal to the king, now living in an independent country, it wouldn't go over too well with most of their neighbors. So this is a portrait of the Treaty of Paris signing. Now, the actual portrait only included the three American delegates, John Jay, John Adams, and Ben Franklin. The three British delegates wouldn't sit for the portrait, so the artist drew them in after with just generic faces or what he could do best from his memory. But the original portrait was left undone because the three British delegates got up and left. Ben Franklin, we all know who he is and what he's done so far with his effect with helping negotiate with the French. We know John Adams with his signing and helping to write the Declaration of Independence. John Jay, we will learn a lot more about in the units to come, especially once George Washington becomes president. But let's get down to the numbers. We'll do this quick. I mean, you can see this, hundreds, thousands of deaths. Right? $27 million gone. We owed over $27 million to England, to France, to Spain. We had to pay back all that money we were given. Not exactly small. But in all reality, what was the greatest cost, the greatest debt that this war had? Human life. Thousands of men were killed. American, British, French. Some would argue this was one of the first great world wars. I don't know if I would go that far, but so many people, so many men died. And women too. Let's be honest here. Men, women, and children were killed in this war. This was a brutal war. But it gets us going in the right direction. First of all, we move away from a monarchy, which was a king or queen. We move towards a republic, or republicanism. We the people rule the government. That we have to embrace the greater good, the good of the country, over our own personal gains, our own personal desires. Vermont and New Jersey automatically, well, not automatically, but straight out outlaw slavery. Elizabeth Freeman sued the state of Massachusetts for her freedom and wins. Massachusetts follows suit shortly after, and they ban slavery. And most of the northern states will fall in line as well, banning slavery. Southern states, well, not so much. But it sets the road for the Articles of Confederation, which we know was purposeful but not perfect. But what leads the way for this, the Constitution of the United States, our current and sitting government of the day.